Hello, everybody, broadcasting live from the great northern wilderness. I bid you good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are around the continent, around the world. My name's Campbell, and this is the Invisible Night School. For those of you just joining us, INS was founded by a group of researchers and academics analytically exploring the study of UFO culture, paranormal phenomena, and epistemology, among other things. INS is not a monolith. We represent varied ideas, backgrounds, disciplines, and experiences, and seek to engage in good faith dialogue with other curious minds. And with that, let me bring on my co-hosts for this evening, Nick and Louise. Hey guys, looking forward to this one. How y'all doing?
Good.
All right.
Unfortunately, Leah will not be with us this week, but I'm certain that she will be back soon. For this evening, Louise, you have so graciously offered to give us a bit of a story from the history books of the UFO culture, I suppose we would call it. It sort of ties in with the sort of history of experiencers, but in a more, because he just this character that we're going to get into, he talks a lot about his experiences and what he saw, and it's about like believing the word of the person. It's an interesting continuation of that older history of people sort of reporting seeing aliens, and now it's sort of reporting seeing things inside the government. What do you think is the best way to introduce people to this mythical almost figure at this point, Louise?
Maybe the context of the 1980s and into the 90s, where the UFO story became more paranoid. It became more centered around government conspiracies and cover-ups. So, like, we had people on the radio like Cooper, and you also had John Leah spouting a lot of insane crap. But he wasn't friends with Lazar, not surprisingly. So I think that sort of background is a little bit important. Lazar didn't invent it. He kind of picked up on it, but it was kind of the right time for that, because I think a lot of things in the American culture were sort of converging to that point. General distrust of the government at that time, and the militia movement as well was becoming a big thing, stuff like that. And then Lazar kind of inserted himself into that stream.
That's a really interesting point that I haven't really considered before. That Bob Lazar, this character, he was originally kind of, he would probably in modern terms be considered kind of these one of these sort of libertarian types, right? He like was sort of doing his own stuff out in the desert, like very skeptical of government in many ways. That's pretty neat and concerning.
Yeah. And John Leah was kind of like that as well. And so was Cooper. I always forget his first name, but you know who I'm talking about.
I do not.
Is it William Cooper?
Yeah, William Cooper. Yeah.
Behold the Pale Horse, that guy?
Sorry? Yeah. Behold the Pale Horse.
Yeah.
He incidentally died in a shootout with police.
Yeah.
Because of unpaid taxes, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I've seen people talk about this guy, and I've done like a cursory look into him and immediately just been like, whoa. Okay. No. That's then he was on the radio, you're saying?
Yeah, he hosted a radio show, I believe.
Okay.
I've never listened to it actually myself, but
that's probably
it's sort of like an Alex Jones before Alex Jones, I guess.
Okay, like anti-tax and stuff, obviously.
Yeah, and for a while, alien conspiracies, but then he sort of dropped that, and he was basically saying that the aliens were themselves a conspiracy by the government to cover up stuff.
I think he accurately predicted targeted ads, though. So,
oh, really?
For one thing.
Or broken clock or whatever, I guess.
So you were kind of setting the stage, the early 80s. There was a late 70s, early 80s, this kind of resurgence of distrust in government, because there was a seed of that in the beginning in the 40s.
Yeah, I would say more like in the late 80s.
Okay.
It really started to harden, and then certainly into the 90s with the X-Files and all those sort of items. But But I mean, certainly, even at the beginning of the contactee movement, there were some musings about government cover-ups, but it wasn't nearly to the extent that it would be later on.
Right.
So Lazar was kind of, as you say, Campbell, kind of I guess you would call him a libertarian type these days, because he was very much into, or still is into, kind of pyrotechnics and doing experiments and stuff like that. Going out into the desert and blowing crap up. But incidentally, his the sport model UFO was called the sport model, which is sort of, I think, like an unconscious tell about his love for sports cars and all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of like little hints in his story that, if you consider them from the perspective of like what is his psychology, like it could tell you a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of UFO conspiracy theorists, people who tell stories like him, they kind of give away the game by unconsciously like dripping their stories with like these little things here and there.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are the, if you could like kind of summarize, what are the claims of Bob Lazar?
That he was that he had worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory as a physicist.
Mm-hmm.
Although he never had worked there as a physicist, he was a technician. He was hired out by Kirk Meyer, which was a contractor back then.
Mm-hmm.
They would hire out technicians and people like that to government agencies, including the national laboratories. Lazar worked there for a maximum of, I think, 8 or 9 months, according to the research of signals intelligence. He wrote up an article. He did a FOIA request, actually, and he sort of bounded the time that Lazar could have worked at LANL, and it was, I think, 8 months maximum. So there was no time for him to become a physicist.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have any formal qualifications in that field either. He claims that he had a master's degree from MIT in magnetohydrodynamics, which was incidentally a UFO-related topic that was doing the rounds in documentaries on TV.
Right.
I think that was like clout chasing, basically, to the UFO crowd. Ironically, Lazar would later say that he didn't know why they hired him. Because he's just a guy, even though he's got a MIT degree about a UFO-related topic. So, and then his other claim is that he got another master's degree from Caltech in electronics engineering.
Mm-hmm.
No evidence for that one either. No documentation in his own possession. No one can really vouch for him. He can't name any of the professors that would have supervised him. So obviously he doesn't have those degrees. Then he claims that he was, while working at LANL, he was talking to Edward Teller, who was like the father of the hydrogen bomb, famous, very anti-communist physicist.
Mm-hmm.
And he claims that basically Teller got him the job at S4, which is meant to be this facility near Area 51.
Right.
He says that he went to S4. He was given like a briefing about sort of the background to the alien engineering program, that they have 9 flying saucers stored there. I don't know why you'd have like 9 of them. If there's an accident, like, wouldn't they all be taken out? But anyway.
Yeah, that does seem like a really bad idea to put them all in one place.
He says that the S4 facility was dug into the side of Papoose Mountain, which is kind of to the southwest of Area 51, the Groom Lake facility.
It's very specific.
Yeah, he says that he was taken to Area 51 on the Janet flights, which is true. Like the personnel do go on Janet flights.
And what are those?
It's like a specially commissioned airline for employees of Area 51. So it's true that they do go on that flight, and some people have said that he could only have known that if he was actually inducted into that program. But in fact, he was friends with John Leah, who had himself worked at the Nevada test site during the early 80s. He was also friends with somebody called Jim Tagliani, who was a electronics engineer or technician at the Tonopah test range, which was doing like electronic warfare and other secret projects. So like he could have gotten any of these logistical details from those sorts of people, fed it into his story. He says that once he got to Area 51, he was put onto a bus, and then it would drive out to Papoose, and then he entered the S4 facility, which housed the flying saucers, and that he worked on a particular flying saucer, the one that he called the sport model because of its very sort of sleek appearance. In fact, it's almost like a carbon copy of a Billy Meyer beam
Yeah,
ship.
I was about to ask that. It looked extremely similar to one of them.
Yep. And
Right. So just the beam ship thing that originates in a VHS tape recording of is that correct? Am I remembering this right?
No, there's a photographer named Billy
Okay.
Meyer, and he created a lot of hoax photographs of different types of saucers. I think if one of them maybe it's called the wedding cake. There's like a really distinctive ridge on one of the edges, and people were able to identify like the common object it was made out of. But he really beautiful photos, but they are hoaxes, of course. And
let me see if I can find one. Yeah, cool. Okay.
actually, if in the first couple seasons of the X-Files, Mulder's original "I Want to Believe" poster is a Billy Meyer photograph, and in fact,
wow.
that's the saucer that looks pretty similar to that sports model, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
And Billy Meyer is still kicking around in Switzerland. His Figu, I don't want to call it a cult because maybe that's too extreme, but his sect, they talk about these space brothers, these Plagerians, who he's supposedly been in contact with for decades.
Oh, right.
And, they've got kind of like a menagerie of flying saucers, including the beam ships. Yeah, that sort of thing. I think the third one there.
Yeah, the third one is the sports model, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Or that one there next to the, I think it's a painting.
Down on the right.
Yeah.
Just click on
this weird thing?
No, click on the third one again.
Okay. Okay, one second. I'm screwing this up. Getting into amateur hour here.
Bottom right.
And then the bottom right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
That picture, that painting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is the Lazar sports model if I know my tester's model kits.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see. Bob Lazar. Sports model?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, there. Okay. Very sleek.
It even has those kind of darkened window panes up at the top.
The portholes, I believe they call them, right? Yeah.
You're right. Sorry.
Nice.
Forgive me.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Well.
And yeah, as Nick mentioned, there is a model kit that you can get. It was sold by the Testers Toy Model Company back in the day.
Wild.
True.
Even though Lazar supposedly has never made a dime from his story, he's actually made a lot of money from it. Although I wouldn't say that that's necessarily his primary motivation.
Sure. Sometimes being a big fish in a little pond is motivation enough.
Jeff from Strange Recon's here, and he says, no, they're sensors, not port lights. So
right?
We've got to be careful.
So Lazar says that he worked on the sport model specifically, that he wasn't allowed to kind of go near the other models, the other flying saucers, even though he saw them. Like they got really poor security if you can just see them.
You think you'd compartmentalize things, right?
Yeah, I mean, the government does obviously compartmentalize stuff, sometimes to an unreasonable degree. But here we're just talking like to a degree that I don't think is really realistic. Because if the government is so desperate to crack the UFO technology and hire somebody like him, then why wouldn't they just let him have access to all the information?
It really.
Now he worked on these things. I'm assuming then he could kind of explain how they work. Correct.
He came up with some sort of so-called explanations for the physics, including saying that they use gravity waves, which was already a concept that was known about since like the early 20th century. I think Einstein talked about gravity waves. He mentioned that the flying saucers use element 115, to power to initiate an antimatter reaction, which then powers the or it powers the systems on the ship, and it amplifies the gravitational energy of the element 115 through these. It's also got like these sort of rectangular shaped gravity amplifiers, as he calls them, sort of near the bottom of the ship. But the element 115 is used to, it's inherently got gravitational properties, according to him. He claimed in an early interview that if you fire a laser beam over a chunk of element 115, the laser would bend away from it, which like would require a crazy amount of gravity.
Yeah.
And yet he also says that Lanol was like involved in machining the parts. Like no machine, like you can't get near it if it's able to deflect laser light.
Yeah.
So this is just like complete fantasy physics. He says that it was doing like distorting the gravity in front of the ship or the space time. So it was like basically pulling itself towards its destination. That's actually pretty similar to some depictions in previous UFO explanations and some documentaries.
Well, that's intriguing to me. Yeah, because I haven't heard of that. I mean, because I don't know a ton about Lazar's story, but I hadn't heard about that specific claim with Lazar, because so many people, especially these days online, like on forums on Reddit and stuff, that's like the primary proposed explanation for some of these modern UFOs, like the way that they travel and stuff, even endorsed by Chris Mellon when he tweeted out like UAPtheory.com a couple of years ago, and he's a former assistant deputy secretary of something about intelligence. So government official and stuff. So that's a prominent thing. And are you saying that Lazar latched onto this from something before him as well?
Well, there was lots of musings about gravity or anti-gravity as the means of propulsion for UFOs. This goes back to like the 1950s, actually. People were already thinking about this stuff. The government was also, and the military were doing investigations into the possibility of using gravity as a way to propel spacecraft or missiles or whatever. That was kind of like, there's actually a very good article on, what's it called? The drive.com. Okay. They've got like a military section there. It's a very long article about sort of the secret government investigations into looking at gravity, but it was just like theoretical physics. It didn't really lead anywhere. So that's another thing. Well, before I get to that, let me just finish your question though. So gravity per se was already touted as a way to propel spacecraft, but Lazar's specific claim is that it was like creating a distortion in front of the spaceship, and that it was basically pulling the craft towards that distortion. Now, some of those claims, so something called the Alcubierre drive, there was a physicist called Alcubierre. I don't know what his first name is, but he wrote a paper where he basically proposed something like this. This was after Lazar, and some people have used that to say, look at that, Lazar was predicting something real. But nobody's actually proven that you can get that much gravity in a concentrated, area. You need a lot of energy for that, and it's only vaguely similar anyway. Yeah, the Alcubierre drive. I think that was proposed in 1994, which was after Lazar.
Oh yeah.
You kind of touched on this a second ago, Luis, but you said this is all like highly theoretical stuff, and I've noticed that is kind of the type of physics that gets published in like popular science magazines and stuff. All this non-applicable, but what I like to call like Star Trek physics, kind of like the stuff you see Eric Davis talk about now. So I mean, it was very likely that this stuff was kind of circulating in pop culture in that kind of popular mechanics, popular science magazine sphere, right?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, even the sometimes you hear claims about the Nimitz encounters, or sorry, not the Nimitz encounters. The other one where you've got like the what's it called? Not the Go Fast, the gimbal. It's meant to be like a sideways sort of tipping UFO, and some people say that is like moving exactly as Lazar described, which it isn't. It's just like distortion from the IR camera.
Right.
But even if it was similar, that sort of description of UFOs was already doing the rounds in the 1950s. And there are even some like photographs of purported flying saucers like tipped over on their sides. Lazar also claimed that the gravitational interaction with the Earth, like between the flying saucer and the Earth, made the UFOs sort of kind of unstable at low speeds, like darting around almost because of the gravitational. Because you know, a planet, it's got like different densities on the surface, so the gravity is going to be a little bit different as you fly over it. That was actually something that Billy Meyer said before.
Interesting.
That sort of idea. So I think maybe John Leah might have fed Lazar some of those tropes and sort of so-called technical details about flying saucers to Lazar. I mean, there's just too much of that stuff to take him seriously. Even if we don't know exactly where all of his claims came from, we can pretty much trace the inspiration for almost all of his claims.
What's interesting is like as the whole UFO narrative as a whole gains any kind of feature, it never is very unique, ever, is it? It's always something drummed up by human imagination ahead of time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a consistent theme I'm seeing where there's like always like a kernel of like reality, and then there are just these layers of kind of like story added onto that. It's the same sort of thing that we've seen throughout the subject in a variety of ways. And, you know, when you look at sort of propaganda theory and stuff like that, you see that the most compelling propaganda is the blend of truth and fiction, not just pure fiction. To what extent, Louise, like, would you attribute like intentionality to Bob Lazar kind of like being deceitful, or do you think he sort of like believes it himself? What's your read on his sort of like underlying psychology? Not to get too deep into it, but just generally.
I think that he doesn't believe what he's saying, although it's certainly possible. But I think that he, especially with his educational claims, that already shows him to be the type of person who could make up a flying saucer story to get fame or attention. Like, if you're going to lie about your education and claim that you've got 2 master's degrees, I don't think that there's any way that he could believe that he has 2 master's degrees.
Right. Okay.
Because, like, you know, obviously he's smart enough to know that you would need to have, like, for example, the yearbook mentions or the documents and stuff like that. He's got absolutely none of that stuff. And he keeps changing his story actually about them. He now claims that the master's degree was actually the MIT degree was actually like a secret program that he was sent to do, and that he can't reveal what it was really about, but it was something horrible.
Okay.
But all of these, he never claimed that before. He was saying that they erased him, right? They erased his records, but now he's saying that it was actually like a top secret project that he can't talk about.
Right. There never were records. Yeah. Okay.
That's interesting. Phil Imbrogno, who worked on the Hudson Valley case we talked about a while ago, I believe he also said he had a degree at MIT, which he didn't. But his excuse was that he went under a pseudonym. Has Bob Lazar tried that one yet?
Not on the MIT degree, I don't think. But he did use a pseudonym when he was first on TV. When George Knapp broke the story, he was in Silhouette, and he was calling himself Dennis, which is supposedly the name of his supervisor or colleague at S4. He claimed that he was under threat from the government, and that he was trying to reveal the secrets of the base because his life was under threat.
Apparently it wasn't, because he's still alive.
Exactly, and they never erased his bank account.
That's another common thing we hear from Men in Black stories too. They threaten your life if you tell the world these secrets. But we've all heard the Men in Black stories from these people who survived to tell them. That's another interesting trope in this story. I don't know if it comes from Men in Black came way before.
Yeah, he does. He claims that he was basically roughed up by security men one night when he was out with George, maybe not George Knapp, but with John Leah and Gene Huff, who was his business associate. They were out near the perimeter of Papoose, the general area, and they were filming, with one of those ancient 1980s camcorders, some lights in the sky, which was supposedly test flights of the flying saucers. And he got arrested, and they threatened him to kill him, basically. But then they let him go for some reason.
Yeah.
Right.
So he killed everybody else.
We have Jeff Knox here in the chat. He's saying that Bob Lazar says degrees don't matter, but he was visiting friends who went to those schools and audited classes with them, but he no longer claims to even have the degrees. Let's see, having degrees, he was visiting friends and audited classes. And this is, he told Linda Moulton Howe in 1989. Interesting.
So
although I will take anything that Linda says with a grain of salt, but
okay, yeah.
If even she's saying that Lazar is full of crap, then let's face it, he is.
Interesting. Well, yeah, that beyond him not being able to back up his extraordinary claims, I mean, we realize that his educational history is a lie and it makes him an unreliable person, right?
Yeah.
It kind of begs the question, why is he still prominent today? Like, why is Joe Rogan talking about him today in 2023?
Rogan is arguably also sort of a libertarian type, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Lazar's story kind of segues into Rogan's ideology to a large extent. So
interesting, yeah.
Rogan's interested in UFOs anyway, and questions like big cosmic questions. So, and Lazar is sort of a good catch for that type of show because he's still believed by many people. So he's actually got about 52 million views now from that video.
Incredible
interview.
Yeah, that's
even though he hates attention.
Sure.
So all these sort of contradictory claims that Lazar makes, and there's also, of course, the brothels that he invested in. He invested in a brothel in the early 80s, and then he did it again in the early 90s.
Were these in states where it's legal or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that in Nevada, where it's apparently legal to do that. But I mean, that's not really the point.
Yeah.
The point is that that would make you a KGB magnet, because Soviet intelligence at the time was still very much active in the US, trying to get whatever scoops they could on American secret programs, especially aerospace and weapons. And somebody like Lazar would be seen by Soviet intelligence as somebody you could compromise, like you could blackmail him. And so like that would already put a red line through his name if they're trying to, US government military is trying to, recruit people for a program like that. Then there's also the revelations about Lazar's his wife, Carol, who apparently was in the Hells Angels and had been involved in a murder.
Interesting. Wow. Wow.
This is an interesting character.
Wait, yeah.
Yeah.
Or did the brothel investments take place before the alleged S4?
Yeah. The first one did. That was in the early 80s. And then the other one was like in 92, 93. And George Knapp apparently, he tells his story as well, that Lazar told him, "Hey, George, I've got this brothel on your street, no less." And then Knapp is like, "You have to stop this immediately because there are people who want you to crash and burn, and they're going to use this as like evidence against you." So that then they go to the police to basically come clean. The police arrest Bob for pandering, and then he goes to court. He pleads guilty to pandering, although he says sometimes that he was just installing computer equipment in the brothel, like security equipment. But in fact, one of the police affidavits or court documents says that the madam of the brothel actually had Lazar as like a co-investor. So he was much more involved than just like installing computer equipment.
Right.
But anyway, like again, this kind of shows a psychological predisposition to that sort of seedy business. And I don't see the government hiring somebody to a program, like to the most important program in US history, namely cracking anti-gravity technology from another planet, giving somebody like Lazar the keys to that.
Sure. Like, as you pointed out, he easily compromised.
Yes. And also lies about his background. So again, it shows that he's the type of person who would make up a story about working on flying saucers. So then we're just left with what's the actual evidence for his claims, and there's really no evidence.
Right.
It's just his word.
Right. It sounds like he sort of like took from a range of niche subjects that were occurring kind of around when he was working at Area 51 as a like technician of some kind, installing equipment and stuff. Not a physicist, like you were saying. And then
he probably never worked at Area 51. But
okay, thank you. Yes. Okay. But then, so there's like these element, like 115, element 115, like it was it was discovered around that time, right? Like I remember something about like it had been in like published in a paper, like kind of close to when he was talking about it. So he may have sort of seen it.
Scientific American article talked about it in the weeks up to his going public.
Right.
But in fact, element 115 was being talked about in the scientific literature since at least the early 1970s, if not earlier.
And it's been synthesized since then, right?
It has been, but that had nothing to do with Lazar.
Right.
Like the properties don't match up. It was unstable isotopes. Lazar says that the alien spaceship used a stable isotope of element 115. At the time, he never mentioned the mass number. So like the number of the neutrons plus protons. Okay. It is present, actually. The mass number is present on merchandise on his company's website, but we don't know where he got the idea for that. I think 299 is the mass number that he touts, but he never mentioned that back in the day.
Interesting.
So, I mean, element 115, it doesn't at all prove the fact that it was synthesized. We would expect it to be synthesized eventually, because that was already stuff that was being done at the time, like elements synthesized, sometimes only for a few milliseconds. But he says that it has special gravitational properties. No, I mean, it's just an element. It doesn't have any magical properties.
Right.
And we don't find it on Earth. We don't find it in the solar system anywhere we've looked. And it is conceivable that out there in the universe, there is a large amount of element 115 in some more stable form. But he doesn't remember what the spectrograph looked like, even though he supposedly was the one who identified it at S4. This actually ties into the Cash Landrum incident, incidentally.
Oh, yeah.
In an early interview, I think in 1990 with Michael Lindemann, Lazar says that he thinks that the Cash Landrum spaceship or craft used plutonium instead of 115, but that it was replicating the gravitational properties of the sport model or the spaceships that they had at S4. This is before they supposedly had him come in to determine what the element was. So why would they need him to come in if they were already reverse engineering it like back in the late 1970s or whenever it occurred, 1980, I think the Cash Landrum was.
Yeah, I believe
so. Weird. A lot of Lazar's like statements and sort of claims, like he seems to get very specific about things in a way that like can be verified to some extent, and then like there's a consistent attempt to do so, and it just sort of like recedes progressively as you try to lock something down. Like What is up with this? Why like okay, it's a big thing now that like we said, like Joe Rogan had him on, like
Yeah.
he's arguably one of the top sort of like people like that is known in the UFO sort of community. Do you have any insight on like there are more compelling narratives out there? What's sort of the central core reason why Lazar is the guy?
I
It's a
think
hard
he
question, maybe.
kind of brings it all together. His story is it was already converging before he told it, because you had things like the 1988 UFO Cover Up Live TV special, where many people were on the show. Many UFO personalities were telling tropes and stories that Lazar would later reprise.
Okay. And
but
what is this event? That's quite interesting. I've never heard of
you
this.
can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
It's excellent.
Yeah, it's got
you know-
more on it as well.
Oh yeah,
Bill
Bill.
Moore and Betty Landrum, and
Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum.
Vicky Landrum. Yeah, they're on it as well.
Yep. It's also got a video from the Hudson Valley sightings on there, Campbell. You should really watch it.
What's it called? Here, I'll just pull it up quickly right now. Yeah.
UFO Cover Up Live.
Cover Up Live. Ooh, they picked a good name, didn't they?
Didn't Doty have something to do with this?
Yeah, he was posing as he was in silhouette.
Yeah.
He was posing as Falcon.
Yeah.
One of the aviary.
Mm-hmm.
Although he wasn't actually Falcon in the original aviary, but he was anyway in the show. He was.
Sure.
He mentioned Area 51 by name. Some people think that Lazar was the first person to ever mention the name Area 51. In fact, mentions of it go back to at least 1979 in the popular media.
Oh, wow.
But again, it's in the documentary. It's in that TV show.
Okay, I was trying to find a clip of the show itself. I'm struggling to find an actual clip.
You'll find I actually made a list of similarities between that show and the Lazar claims on my website.
Pull that up.
If you go to ufologyiscorrupt.com and then click on the blog section.
I'll just pull it up right now. Yeah, everybody listening, watching. Yeah, Louise done this amazing.
If you go to blog.
Yes.
There's the chip.
And there he is. All right. And is it on the main page?
Just keep going down.
Okay.
I've actually got a couple of Lazar articles, including one that I did with Amy Collins, that one about Bill Cooper and John Leah and the S4 badge. We can talk more about that in a sec if you want. But if you go, that one there.
Okay, here we go.
It also links to a video that I have on YouTube. Just click on, if you punch in UFO cover up,
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so there are some timestamps.
Excellent. Okay.
So that's another one. That's from 1980, but just keep scrolling down to 1988.
Okay. Damn, you are so extensive. Wow. Yeah, this is excellent research. Everybody should check this out. Absolutely. Okay, here we go.
I hope those still work. Sometimes videos are dropped from YouTube, but
is there one that you recall that's specifically interesting?
Oh, there's the Falcon one.
Oh yes, Falcon. Okay. Oh, then this is Doty, and Doty is let's just remind everybody, he was the U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who was involved in and what is the name of the movie again?
Well, he was involved in the Benowitz.
Yes.
Yeah. You're thinking of Mirage Men.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, he was in Mirage Man too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
But there's a bunch of things in that TV special.
Okay, let me just share that separately then.
Yeah. I believe that's in public domain now, right?
Yeah, it should be.
So yeah, it should be up on YouTube all over the place. Hopefully.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, you guys can hear that?
Information pertaining to UFOs. Part of it, that was
scientific
advancements. But their primary purpose was to keep track of the information coming in on UFOs and to analyze the information, both scientifically and in a way that would advance our technology. There are government officials and elected officials that are automatically briefed on the existence of the MJ-12 activities.
Okay, wow, creepy. You can tell it's him, eh? It's like,
yeah.
you can see the jawline. That's funny. Okay, wow, that's amazing though. Yeah.
Lazar did talk about MJ-12 in the extent that he says that his security ID badge at S4 said MAJ on it, MAJ, and also his supposed W-2 tax form had MAJ on it as well. Which is
I've seen a renewed interest in the MJ-12 documents as well lately. And I think that's really interesting. I didn't think that there was really any more room for that after, God, was it Class who found the cut and pasted signatures on those documents?
Right. But it keeps rearing its ugly head.
Yeah, that document, MJ-12, it's a pretty infamous one, right? That's the origin, if I recall correctly, of the whole belief in President Eisenhower was like conspiring with aliens and stuff. And it's been quite thoroughly debunked, as you pointed out, Nick. A very significant document, though. Yeah, within the culture. Yeah.
It's also in the latest installation of American Horror Story.
Interesting, really. I haven't watched it in a long time.
Eisenhower, you see him like making a deal with the aliens and stuff like that. The Roswell crash.
That's where he agreed to, like, so many number of American citizens are allowed to be abducted.
Right, for their nefarious experiments. It's a cool plot, like.
Sure.
Something that Paul Benowitz would come to believe.
Real Benowitz believed that was his.
Yeah, that there was the Dulce base. It was housing like a secret alien research facility where American citizens were being kidnapped and experimented on, and that the government knew about this. And I think Cooper believed that for a while, but I think he dropped out of that belief. John Leah believed it. Yeah, John Leah is such an interesting person, but there might not have been a Lazar without John Leah, possibly.
And I'm not super familiar with John Lear. You said he was like a radio host at the time, kind of on the libertarian side of things. Is that kind of roughly correct?
He was a very proficient pilot. He'd flown like dozens of different airframes. He worked at the Nevada test site during the early 80s. I don't know if you want to go back to my website. There's actually an article there about him. Okay. You see a photo of him from the early 80s next to one of the aircraft that he flew over the site to collect air samples, because they were, they were testing nuclear weapons there underground, but they were concerned that some of the radioactive material was leaking out into the atmosphere. So they would do some, it's not in that one, it's in the other Lazar. Just go back up to blog.
Okay, here we go. Yes, sorry, got confused there for a second. All right. And Lear, is that a relation to the airplane company?
Yeah, his father.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so he wasn't. Yeah, I was totally off on. So he was like independently wealthy and interested in sort of like UFOs.
That's the one.
Okay. That's an interesting element of this too, actually. The sort of like the rich kid interest in UFOs, like we have like Chris Mellon of the Mellon family. Gosh, who else is there? Leslie Keane, right? Or Kane, if that's how you're supposed to say it, apparently. Tom now he's rich. Yeah. I don't know how he grew up though. I guess he grew up kind of middle class, right?
No clue.
Yeah, I don't know actually. Yeah, I only know a few of the songs that have grown up with them, obviously. But okay, so here we go. John Lear and Bill Cooper. Is there a section specifically you were looking for, Louise, or should I scroll down and you can kind of?
Just scroll down.
Yeah,
sure. We'll hit it eventually. It was just my correspondence with Amy, and she gave me that that graphic up there. That's an ID badge, by the way, at the Nevada test site that they were using. And Lazar's ID badge that he sort of reconstructed from memory, as he says, is not period accurate. The style of the card doesn't match when he supposedly worked at S4.
Does it look similar to a more recent one though?
It looks more similar to the older ones, but then in the late 80s they updated them, and that's when Lazar supposedly worked there, but it doesn't match up.
I see.
Your language, Louisa. Lazar stands exposed as a compulsive plagiarist of narrative elements. Nice. Now let's see here. Yeah, I guess I must have scrolled over it because, okay. Oh, here we go. Yeah, message with Amy. Found the backstory of the security badge.
So Amy's stepfather actually worked at the Nevada test site.
Oh, wow.
And he knew a lot about, obviously, the goings on there. And so does Amy, because she does a lot of research into this kind of stuff.
Right. And so you've done a fair bit of digging like yourself, Louise. I just want to emphasize that. Like you've been communicating with these individuals directly, getting the stories like from people who sort of are attached, at least tangentially, to the actual situation on the ground. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Now there's another similar claim from Lazar about hand scanners too, right? That's kind of
the hand scanner, the Identimat hand scanner.
Yeah,
which was actually seen in the the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which came out in 1977, I think. You see one of those there. But the Identimat was actually seen in electronics catalogs since like the late 60s.
Interesting.
It was also used at the Tonopah test range during some of the developments of the F-117 stealth aircraft.
Oh.
And possibly Jim Tagliani told Lazar about that. So that could have been the inspiration for saying that they were used at S4.
Right. So this, like, you're just basically, in this article, you've written a blog post going through sort of the individual items, the claims, and then just testing them against information that can be accessed. And it doesn't come out well at all for Bob, and unfortunately for his supporters.
You can always make a more elaborate story that, they covered this up or whatever, but like it just becomes too convoluted and obviously not very parsimonious.
Well, and I'm just thinking, it's like this is like one claim about a badge, and it's like item after item can be identified as problematic. Like, it's like, why is he so bad at this? Why is he making such specific? I guess people are like prompting him for specifics. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
he tried to sort of give these little sort of confirmations, but then when you look at them, they don't add up. And then there's also the vague claims that he makes, where he knows that a lot of people are not scientifically, minded or literate, and he can just basically get away with stuff that sounds sort of sciencey. He does that a lot as well. Or he just says that it was so long ago that he can't remember, or that he can't talk about it because he doesn't want to get people in trouble. So there's always like an excuse or like an out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot like the appeals to quantum physics now, or even appeals to consciousness. Now, he does seem to be an unsinkable rubber ducky. Do you think that is partially because more contemporary figures are still kind of backing him up? Like, I think George Knapp still contends that he's telling the truth, right?
Yeah, George Knapp is basically, I think, dug himself into a hole, or he's sunken his costs into the Lazar story. He's the one who broke the Lazar story to the public, and he obviously doesn't want to appear like he was made a fool of by Lazar, that he was tricked. So he has to, almost for his reputation, I guess, has to sort of keep pushing it.
That's so kind of transparent and out in the open, though. Like, so you can see that he's doing that. That seems.
Yeah. But I mean, I think with this disclosure right now going on, so-called disclosure and these hearings, there's more of like a kind of a buffer there. People can just about believe that Lazar is telling the truth, because if the government is saying that aliens are real, although they're not, but that's the claim that's often made, then it's not that far out to believe that maybe they're also hiding alien technology.
Sure.
So it's sort of in the background is sort of conducive to believing Lazar in some ways. So people find it easier.
It's interesting that this whole kind of plot line, which was kind of picked up by the X-Files and stuff, the UFOs and the government knowing about it and hiding it, was actually written by Ray Palmer in 1946.
Yeah.
And life, including extraterrestrial, seems to imitate art. Very surprising. You wouldn't think it would.
Now, so Bob Lazar, like you were mentioning, Louise, like he got into some difficulties, right? Like if I remember correctly, like he tried to start his own festival in the desert that didn't really pan out. He was sort of trying to like make a name for himself in several respects, like building a car that ran on, what was it, hydrogen or something, kind of interesting. Like he was like quite competent with making stuff. Obviously not consistent with building a flying saucer, but so we have this sort of situation where he sort of looks like he's ascending, and then he gets into sort of like these legal troubles with like being arrested on those criminal charges you mentioned and stuff. And I get the sense that he kind of went away for a bit, and then people sort of grabbed onto his story again. And we have this filmmaker now, Jeremy Corbell, documentarian, very interested in UFOs, believes sort of the Lazar story, and he got Lazar out there, like for a whole new generation of people who haven't been through the line by line of all these issues, and they just see him on Rogan.
Oops.
And so the cycle kind of continues, and obviously you're fighting it, but is there any hope that potentially this cycle could be broken at some point? Like based on your knowledge, actually Nick too, with your experience of the UFO subject history in general, like when with the original in the 50s, the people like Adamski and stuff, they did eventually sort of go away with the sort of exposure repeatedly to sort of like evidence of fraud.
Like Luis said, Billy Meyer's still kicking around. Lazar keeps popping back up. All these things. Well, I mean, daily we see old UFO video hoaxes that we saw months ago that are being passed around by the newer people and stuff, right? So, like I called Lazar all these things, all these unsinkable rubber duckies. I guess the kind of the mystique and the narrative is a better seller than the reality of these things, so it's more popular, I suppose.
There's also the ecological problems we're facing. Desire for free energy. The alien reactor or the engine is touted as like the cure for all of our basically societal problems, because then we're not going to fight over oil in the Middle East or stuff like that. And there's also a religious aspect, which obviously goes back to the contactees. They've always been here in ufology, where people believe that the aliens are basically the salvation.
Yeah.
And instead of God or Jesus, you have the extraterrestrials coming down from space, promising, the next stage of human evolution, basically.
Yeah. They always seem to have suggestions to our problems that are just kind of concepts we already understand anyway.
Yeah.
Like, don't drop nuclear bombs on each other or take care of the environment in an individualistic way. Do your part and recycle. Not the aliens aren't coming down and telling any of the corporations that are polluting the air have a larger carbon footprint to stop that. It's always like, the individual or a group of children, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like a good strategy to me for these aliens.
It is always sort of the reverse psychology. It's sort of like since this is true, what could explain that, right? It's sort of, you call it, I guess, religious thinking or magical thinking or whatever, constructing it in reverse. And we're sort of seeing actually like with these figures, they are I sort of get a sense that they're like almost becoming like mythical figures in a like it's not an organized religion in any sense of it, but there are like a sort of loose system of beliefs that are coalescing in a way that I'm seeing it progressively, like on the forums, on Twitter, on Reddit and stuff, and it does bear some similarities in some respects, perhaps. Louise, you could speak on this too because of your knowledge of it, like the emergence of occult traditions in the 19th century, almost as a reaction to the theory of evolution and sort of like materialism and stuff. And that was all rooted in the idea that there was an active communication with other entities, this hope for sort of like
some streams within spiritualism went in for that stuff. Some groups like Theosophy also believe that they could communicate directly with beings like at a higher dimensional or spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
And that got transformed into literal extraterrestrials on Venus. Venus is also like something which has long been used by contactees, especially those influenced by Theosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But with cults, you sometimes do get these extreme beliefs, like the ones we saw with Heaven's Gate. If you recall, mass suicide because they thought that the comet was going to take them away. So they had to kill themselves to ascend to the comet, which is actually hiding a spaceship. You also see things like the Order of the Solar Temple, which was I don't think that was really a UFO religion, but it had some cosmic beliefs along those lines. There was a cult which was active in France, Switzerland, and Quebec. And they also did a mass suicide. I think it was in the 90s. And right now we're seeing stuff like the star seeds and these ideas about genetic predispositions to being in contact with UFOs or aliens.
Right.
And there's the whole consciousness aspect as well, where people believe that they are they're communicating with aliens, and sometimes even they are the aliens, like that they lived in a previous life as an extraterrestrial, but they're here to help liberate mankind. And that can lead to extremism easily because, in this current culture and political situation, there's really like a breakdown of consensus reality. Leah has spoken to that a lot as well. And fake news and all that stuff. So people are kind of really primed to believe really weird stuff.
Mm-hmm. Speaking to your question, Campbell, do you think that maybe these kind of figures are created because we kind of have, especially coming from the perspective of the ETH or the NHI hypothesis, which I think is a natural conclusion to come to living in the United States culture, if you don't think about it too hard. But do you think that since there are no real authorities on the subject from that perspective, it kind of creates a vacuum? So we kind of just put these people on pedestals, just kind of the most vocal people? Because I think all of us kind of have a tendency to seek out authorities when we have questions for things like this. And given that this, in my opinion, comes from a kind of a cultural superstition, there wouldn't necessarily be authorities. Do you think that maybe is how these figures like Bob Lazar are created?
Are you asking me or no, Louise? Right?
Whoever.
Oh.
It's for you, Campbell.
Sure, it's for you.
Oh, geez, I don't know, honestly. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, why do these certain people get elevated, right? And it has to do with, in part at least, sort of verification of these underlying things related to identity. And we see this in over and over again in these communities. It's and they're self-selective, right? It's like if the person is capable of critically challenging the claims, then they self-select out of it. It's almost like how it's like 90 whatever percent of CEOs are sociopaths. Technically, it's like it self-selects. They like weed themselves out, and you end up with the core. And yeah, in the population in general, maybe it's like a pretty small amount, but then you can create these subcultures that are very highly concentrated with these particular views, and can create sort of these conditions of self-radicalization.
There's also the thing where people want to feel like they are in possession of answers that nobody else is, and they want to be the imparters of knowledge.
Yeah.
You see that a lot of in conspiracy culture, and also there's a scholar, I forget his name. He actually studies conspiracy culture. He said that conspiracy theories are really like the poor man's heuristic, because there's a lot of complexity in the world. If you're poor, you don't have that much time to pass it all out. And conspiracy theories are kind of a simplification of the world, because you can just allocate all the causal relationships to this cabal of conspirators, like the Illuminati. So it sort of simplifies the universe.
Yeah, and it kind of when your situation kind of contradicts that idea of meritocracy, like poor people, working full-time jobs are working hard and they're not seeing the benefit of that. So there must be some kind of outside reason for it. So I can get how that's appealing to a lot of people, and that's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, but that can't be the only explanation either, because with the Order of the Golden, the Solar Temple, for example, and many other cults, you see affluent middle-class professionals joining them. So it can't just be the hankering for like simple answers, although there is like a hankering for like a higher answer. It's not like just the desire to like make everything simple. So like there has to be some other push going on as well.
So the commonalities between all these things, and going back to like the beginnings of spiritualism, they're all so similar. It's really strange. And kind of how a lot of people are talking about consciousness now as if it's kind of like this other place, or the ether. Yeah. Where be it dead spirits are giving you prophecies, or it's psychic mediums channeling, or it's these space brothers contacting Venusians. It always seems to be on that kind of edge of our understanding. Kind of like what you were talking about, how Bob Lazar would speak. He would use that kind of pseudo-intellectual, scientific, flowery language that was based on that kind of hypothetical stuff that kind of goes over a lot of people's heads who don't have the science education. So it sounds intelligent. It's really similar to that, in my opinion. Sorry, my cat is.
Yeah, a lot of quantum mysticism right now, using the garb of quantum mechanics, but trying to sneak in a bunch of unverified claims. And not just quantum mechanics, also archaeology. What's his name? The famous pseudo-archaeologist.
Graham
Hancock.
Yes.
Yeah. He is doing kind of.
Sorry, just this question really quickly. What was the name of the scholar you referenced about heuristics?
Let me. Conspiracy Nation is the book.
Okay.
It's called Conspiracy Nation.
Let's look it up.
It's a good title. What is more American than conspiracy?
That's the one. Who's the author, or who's the editor? Because it's actually a compilation. Peter Knight.
Nice.
Yes.
Peter Knight.
Okay.
What was I saying?
Yeah, I really cut you off there. It was a response to.
Hancock.
Yes.
Yeah, Hancock has always been about the sort of Atlantis and ancient civilizations, which have, were destroyed by a giant flood and that sort of stuff. He did briefly flirt with ancient astronauts ideas in the 90s, but then he got out of that. If you remember the so-called Face on Mars,
yes,
Hoagland was the one promoting that, and then Hancock got in on that act for a brief time, but then he pulled out, went back to Atlantis ideas. So, I mean, it's kind of across the board, or this sort of pseudoscience is not just in quantum mysticism, but it's also archaeology, human psychology, and Jung also is brought up a lot as well. Although there are some valid ideas by Jung, and I think we should explore them. But I think sometimes people also take them way too far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Just kind of at face value and literal.
Mm-hmm.
So, Louise, maybe we could talk a little bit about like the harm side of things. We touched on sort of like the fact that these groups sort of come together and sometimes get into these sort of ritual like cult situations, and you know, a lot of the time it's like stuff that doesn't look as dangerous as it is, like at surface level, right? Like it's like the belief that you're like kind of communicating with another being, like, you know, that's almost mainstream really in some ways if you think about it from like a religious framing or something. Like a large percentage of people think that. So then like there's the sort of nefarious element that we're touching on, where this can sort of like emerge. Like what should people sort of be looking out for, like for themselves, in terms of avoiding sort of finding themselves into that sort of situation?
The way that these conspiracy beliefs overlap and converge, and the way that the purveyors are using UFOs and aliens as ways to pull people into something else. Okay, it's not really about the aliens or UFOs ultimately. It's about promoting some idea about how society should be organized.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you know, many times a very negative and authoritarian or very bigoted social setup. You know, neo-Nazis have done this with UFOs. They've written books and stuff to sort of attract young people.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea there is really to make people think like, if the government is lying about UFOs, then maybe they're also lying about the Holocaust. And maybe the Holocaust didn't actually happen. And maybe the Jews really are in control of the world. And maybe the Nazis weren't, you know, the bad guys. So it's like UFOs.
Quite a chain of reasoning.
Yeah, but I mean, Ernst Zundel.
Yeah.
He actually wrote a book about UFOs, and he admitted that he didn't believe a word of it. It was just a way to get young people to kind of become interested in Nazism.
That's kind of how Q operated too. They kind of just incorporated all sorts of conspiracy theories basically as pipelines into that kind of core belief, right?
Yes. So, I mean, I would be on the lookout for that. Ask, what is the ulterior motive of this person? What else do they believe, which is really far out?
Mm-hmm.
Would I want to live in the society that they want? Okay. And do they benefit in some way? Like they get money, even though they don't really verify their claims.
Mm-hmm.
Do they source their claims properly? Do they actually cite valid science? This is very difficult for many people because they don't really know how to think about these things, but that's sort of the general contour, I guess, is to sort of be on the lookout for why somebody's telling you something.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's probably the simplest way to put it.
Yeah, but there's a lot to go into there because people have got like different levels of scientific understanding and logical thinking. So if somebody's telling you to drop your logical and rational thought processes, then that's a big red flag.
With your own experience, Louise, would you be able to comment a little bit about like maybe just like the first time you heard about Bob Lazar and like the context of that and what you thought initially, and maybe like a bit about like the development of your thoughts over time if they changed?
The first time I heard about Lazar, I think, was in a magazine series in the 90s. This might have been like in the mid 90s, 1997, that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was called The X Factor. And it was like a weekly or bi-weekly magazine that you would purchase. And you'd build up like this nice sort of volume, this set. It had a piece in there about Lazar, sort of it was basically pushing his story, although it did mention the brothel thing. But you know, I was a teenager back then, so I sort of believed it. The teenagers are very, very susceptible, by the way, to sort of countercultural authority figures.
Mhm.
They reject traditional authority or established authority, but they want to believe other types of authority, like conspiracy theorists. So, but anyway, I sort of believed it back then. I didn't know anything about, the ins and outs of element 115 or anything like that. And then I dropped it for a long time. And then more recently, I watched a video by the Mouthy Buddha, which I think is a channel that got dropped. And he made a video about Lazar, and he was asking like sort of pros and cons of the story, trying to balance it out. And he made some claim about Zeta Reticuli, or Lazar did, that he read in a briefing document that the aliens come from Zeta Reticuli. And then that sort of got me thinking, well, Zeta Reticuli, the only reason that we think about Zeta Reticuli in alien UFO lore is because of the Betty and Barney Hill story.
Mm-hmm.
And that was completely debunked as like a possible site for the aliens, because, the star map didn't work and stuff like that, the updated data from the Hipparcos satellite. So in other words, Lazar just got that trope because it was doing the rounds in UFO lore and for no other reason. Although he says like he can't vouch for it because it was a briefing document and maybe it was just disinformation. But again, he's just like covering his own ass.
Can kind of say anything.
Yeah, typical of Lazar to always give himself like an out for any of his claims.
Well, it's all of them kind of have a similar theme that we're seeing, right? That it's like the face on Mars and whatever, like, and that's more of a literal thing where like there's a sort of observation and a claim about that observation. And then when you literally, like in this case, physically get a higher resolution, it dissolves into being nothing.
Hoagland said that that's because NASA airbrushed it or they changed it.
Well, I mean, and then you push the sort of story forward over and over until it becomes impossible, I guess, because how many spacecraft are over Mars now, right? Like there's several different nations doing work there. So
well, if NASA wanted to hide it, why did they release that photo in the first place?
It's always a good question. Everybody makes mistakes sometimes. There
we go. There's always an excuse.
Just slip past the censors. Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the way that it seems to occur. It's too bad because it's like I like the idea of it. Like in the late 1800s in whatever, I feel like I would have been like, oh, that would be pretty cool if the scientists claiming they're seeing canals on Mars. That would be neat if it actually was real. I guess it just sort of comes down to like what you actually. I mean, and like I started the show, I changed the intro a tiny bit. I included that we focus on epistemology as well, and that's the delineation between opinion and fact, the justifications for that. That sort of comes down to like a lot of this comes down to that, right? Like how you justify like what you interpret as a fact from an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we're sort of talking about a lot of statements from an individual. And, I impulsively want to believe people when they're talking, but it's sort of like that old Russian saying that Ronald Reagan appropriated, trust but verify. The verification is very important in that whole mixture.
Lazar basically refuses to be verified because he supposedly is a physicist, but he never is like interviewed by other physicists, his supposed peers, right? He was apparently he was invited by Ben Rich, who was the head of the Skunk Works back in the 90s, the Lockheed Skunk Works. Ben Rich heard Lazar's story. He actually invited Lazar to like a gathering of aerospace journalists and engineers. Lazar, of course, declined.
What's up with like skunk works? Because we've had skunk works appear in the recent UFO narrative as well. If I remember right, Tom DeLonge recruited a former director of Skunkworks to serve on his like executive team of his To the Stars startup when he was trying to claiming that he was going to reverse engineer a UFO and stuff like that. Are you familiar with sort of the ins and outs of it's an advanced weapons program of some kind, right?
Yeah, it's Skunkworks started in the 50s, in the late 50s, I think. The Lockheed Company, which is now the Lockheed Martin Company, after they merged with Martin Marietta, I think it was called. But it's like a kind of a very high-tech or special aerospace program, very innovative. That's, the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, and other planes came out of that program.
Okay.
And some of those projects were being tested at the at Area 51. So Area 51 has long been sort of at the center of UFO lore. The CIA itself actually said, I don't know if this is true, but they claimed that half the UFO sightings during the Cold War were due to misidentifications of aircraft coming out of Area 51.
I've heard something about like that they originally were doing the like really high flying stealth craft, like they were in chrome or something, and it was just like
reflective,
going off the charts with people calling it in, especially with like the whole like, oh, the Soviets are in the sky because of Sputnik and all of that, right? So then they started painting them black. Right?
Yeah, and in a way, the government might have found it useful to allow people to believe in UFO stories because it acted as a useful cover for what was actually going on. But the question you're asking is more about like the current sort of personalities involved in TTSA, right? And so I don't know, like, I mean, maybe there's something about the personality of people at Skunkworks, like they sort of think outside the box, and some of them just happen to be a little bit too much in that direction, and so they're sort of predisposed to believing that we can maybe capture alien spacecraft and hopefully reverse engineer them.
That's an interesting take.
If like a Skunkworks, you probably know more about this person than I do, but if somebody joins TTSA and they're from the Skunkworks and they're not saying that they themselves worked on recovered craft, then doesn't that mean that there were no recovered craft? Because they would know.
That's what they have to say.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, though. Yeah.
Not just Lockheed Skunkworks, but there's also Boeing has got its own special division. But I mean, really, any of these giants in aerospace, they would know about any reverse engineering because they'd be the ones to do it.
Right.
So would the Department of Energy as well, which has got extensive experience at the Nevada test site and does many secret projects as well on nuclear energy. And they would be reverse engineering any antimatter reactor or anything like that. But there's absolutely no evidence from any former DOE directors or anybody that there was any such program.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The stuff that Lazar is claiming would be highly classified, right? Like, how are we able to continue to do? We saw that that kid who leaked classified documents on some. I think it was a Discord. There's people in some online game involving tanks that people are constantly leaking classified docs onto. Those guys are getting scooped up immediately on live TV too.
Well, so Lazar has got a convenient excuse for that too. If they were to assassinate or arrest him, then it would only validate his story.
That's why they never killed Fox Mulder in the X-Files.
Right.
Awesome.
But in fact, that would set a terrible precedent for other whistleblowers because then anybody could just come out with anything and there wouldn't be any consequences. So in fact, they would arrest him. They would silence him if he was actually revealing that.
They certainly would.
And they always do. It's true. Yeah.
The problem that Lazar himself claims that this program was like even more classified than the hydrogen bomb. And like they just give it to him. This guy who invested in brothels, who lied about his education, who was like a KGB magnate. He also claims that the program was very sort of bare bones. Like it was hardly any resources were, put to it. Somebody actually mentioned that the just the tires on the SR-71 spy plane had more people working on that than at S4, which doesn't make any sense, right? If this was like the most important program ever to reverse engineer like anti-gravity, then it would be like the Manhattan Project 2.0.
Right. I feel like we would see some kind of residual effects from harnessing this new kind of like quantum leap in technology too. I know people will bring up like ideas like Wi-Fi and fiber optics, but we can actually trace the origins back of those, far back. So like, what are we getting out of this? Because we're not seeing it in any wars or anything.
Right.
We're not seeing it domestically. So what came from this like ultimate technology that they reverse engineered?
Apparently nothing.
Wow.
Even though Lazar claims that they test flew the spacecraft at S4, so they did figure out basically how it works. He gave us all this fake physics. He wants us to believe, so they did figure out how it works basically, according to him, even though they didn't, according to him. Some people would say that the government doesn't want free energy to be available because then it would crash the economy. But I think that in fact, free energy would give the US such a strategic advantage that many people within the US, scientists, engineers, politicians, military people, would rebel against any decision to suppress that technology.
That makes
and also, if you think about like, and this is something that John B. Alexander has mentioned, he's sort of a conspiracist himself, but he's also close to the Skinwalker conspiracy nonsense as well. Skinwalker Ranch claims, but he does raise some good points in his book. One of them is that if they had this anti-gravity tech, then they would use it to rescue like Marines or soldiers who were captured in war zones. And that the friends of those soldiers would expose that technology because they would be angry that the government didn't use it to rescue their friends.
Right.
So like, there would be too many people within the military who would realize that it could have been used, but it wasn't. And that Americans died because of that. And they wouldn't put up with that. So there would be leaks all over the place.
That makes total sense. And there are historic precedents of things like that. Like, and I'm just trying to remember the name of it, but the CIA project that was top secret, where they sent a fake mining ship into the middle of the Pacific Ocean to recover a sunken Russian nuclear submarine. They kept it secret for like at least like it was like 15 years or something, that they actually found the location of this sunken Russian ship. The Russians didn't know where it was. And that was actually, okay, that's actually related very closely to a bunch of this stuff, right? Because they had the underwater listening devices, and they were able throughout the not entire, but a lot of the Cold War to pinpoint the exact location of the entire Soviet nuclear fleet in the Pacific the entire time. And they did keep that secret for that time, but it always does come out. And this is just a fraction of, that's a fraction of, aliens were here and stuff. So it really, it does fall, like it's just from a human, one individual to individual level. If you think about it, it's like these are people, they go home and stuff. Like it's hard to conceive of it being possible. And when you actually look at the details and you see that they sort of collapse, they aren't supported by looking deeper. It does make you sort of sit back and think, like, how does this have this level of sort of like perpetuate? Like, how does it perpetuate like so effectively? It's stunning.
It's a little bit like the moon landing conspiracy theories. That just is. It's not possible to cover up. It would actually be more difficult to fake the moon landings than it would be to go to the moon.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you. Something
You would
like
have to
that, yeah.
you would have to trick all the engineers and scientists into believing that they were building a space-worthy vehicle, even though it wasn't. Right? So,
That's incredible. Yeah, everybody in the launch. That's such a good point. Everybody would be there, being like, "We're gonna do it," like fake, miscalculating the landing approach. I love
yeah.
that part of it. Armstrong taking manual control of the spaceship with 20 seconds of fuel left to actually land like hundreds of meters past the landing pad. Like, it's stunning, and it does. It just speaks to like how it's not attached directly to the facts. There's something else going on in people's minds, and it's like the alternative narrative is fulfilling something, right? Like there's something else happening other than just the information. I just pulled this up, Project Azorian. That's the CIA project I was talking about, just to show it's like a pretty interesting little thing. Just the government does do conspiracies, but we find out about them, and they're theories. Then they're actually just part of history. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I guess we could kind of wrap it up. We sort of we're very thankful, Louise, that you were willing to sort of go into this this evening. Do you have any final thoughts, Louise, about Lazar's story? Like things that people should take away from this?
People should counter to what Lazar said in the Campbell documentary. People should, in fact, look at the minutiae. Because those sorts of details make his sorts of claims that makes it untenable. When you look at the institutional and historical nitty gritty, that's what really destroys these kinds of stories.
Excellent.
It reminds me of what's that quote of J. Allen Hynek's, where the UFO phenomenon is like a bundle of sticks, and it doesn't matter how many break as long as they still hold together. But if any multiple of 0 is 0, so if each claim crumbles as you look at it, it doesn't amount to anything.
Leslie Kane actually used that analogy to say that the preponderance of UFO cases speaks to the reality of an otherworldly presence. Like even if you could like debunk any one of those straws in that bundle, you still have the bundle. So, but I think that's really faulty logic.
It'd be really interesting too that if there was some real alien UFO encounter and it kind of conformed to the homogeny of the UFO narrative that we've kind of created culturally too, like a flying saucer landing with a gray in it, despite decades and decades of these turning out to be misidentifications and hoaxes kind of spurred by media. So yeah, that you'd think that the real cases, the actual sticks there would kind of stick out like a sore thumb.
The real case would be something that is very different to the typical UFO narrative, and something that actually has got strong evidence for it.
Right. Most importantly.
Yeah.
And this brings to mind the origins of Occam's razor, right? William of Occam, a 14th century friar. Occam's razor was originally created to argue that the wide number of claims of witnessing miracles from around Europe throughout the years, similar features of the claims, provided evidence that the simplest answer is that miracles are real. And that was the origin of Occam's razor. So it's important to remember that, even in applying Occam's razor, what you're putting into it is what really kind of matters more than sort of the little trick itself. Like the details always matter.
Was that it?
I guess so for now. Yeah. Nick, you have any parting words for us?
Let me just plug this book by Curtis Peebles.
Oh yeah, Watch the Skies fame.
Yeah, exactly.
Another good one.
This one's about the skunk works and other top secret projects in aerospace. Area 51. Really good history.
Nice.
This is the actual history of Area 51.
Oh, real.
Not what Lazar says.
Nice. All right.
Yeah. You feeling good, Nick? We
hit an hour and a half. Pretty good.
Yeah, that's not bad. 3 out of 4. We did 3 half hours out of 4.
There we go.
Yeah.
Like
Half
it.
hour person. That's how it works, right?
Yeah. Oh, Jeff Knox saying Occam's razor has to be one of the most misquoted and misrepresented things. Yeah, I do agree. There's a part that always gets left out in that, all things being equal, right? So when we have equal corroborating evidence or two opposing things, that's when Occam's razor is usually applied. Yeah, it does. I agree.
Yeah, that makes it better. Yeah, that's a better saying. We should perpetuate that. Okay, well, I guess that's it for tonight. Well, I guess good night, everybody. I'll take us off here.
Yeah, have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.